Historian channel. We're here in Lebanon, Pennsylvania. We are at Salem Evangelical Lutheran Church here on the corner of Willow and 8th Street. There's also the Memorial Chapel here for Salem Evangelical. A little loud, trains coming through, so we're going to go through here and we're going to talk about this church. This is a really historic church. It would be the second oldest church in Lebanon City. It's a Lutheran church. The oldest is actually Tabor Reformed Church, which eventually would become United Church of Christ. The first church here was actually built in 1766, and that would have been most likely, I believe it could have been a stone, but I believe it was a log church, which is really how they normally did a lot of those churches. But they built this church here between 1796 and 1798, and now it was originally just one story. We'll go around this, and they actually have a pretty cool plaque. This is on the National Registry of Historic Buildings. I believe it was around 2010. They do have a plaque here at least somewhere. Yeah, National Registry of Historic Places on June 28th, 2010. And actually the Memorial Chapel, which was built about 100 years later, that's also on the National Registry. But it said, on this site in 1766 was erected the first church and schoolhouse in the city of Lebanon. On the tower of this building hangs a bell cast in 1773, which proclaimed in Lebanon County the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The first regular pastor of this church, Frederick Augustus Conrad Muhlenberg, was president of the convention that adopted the Constitution of the United States and the Speaker of the First House of Representatives. Also was the fourth Speaker. The cornerstone of this building was laid 1796, and the building was consecrated 2 years later. So let's walk around the church here, and we'll talk a little bit about it. We've talked about John Caspar Stover quite a bit. The Frederick Augustus Conrad Muhlenberg, he was actually the son of the patriarch. He had a pretty odd name, but him and John Caspar Stover were considered the founders of the American Lutheran Church. And John Caspar Stover was actually the first pastor of this church in 1766. And thanks to Lebtown and that, they're actually a really cool local news agency. Does a lot of really awesome local for Lebanon County, that type of stuff there, historical stuff, and then updating on just the local and events of the day. But this is actually a marker. There is somebody, I believe, buried here. This is one of the pastors of the church. He was a pastor here for quite a long time, because I didn't realize, I thought, well, it's maybe a memorial or something like that, but it's hard to read. But the wife, and it's Reverend William G Ernst. He was pastor, I think one of the first pastors as well. He preached the gospel for, looks like it said, 31 years, 29 of which he was pastor of this congregation. So he probably would have been, I would assume, the second pastor, because when this was actually built in 1796 and 1798, and we can look up through there at the, and that's where the bell is up in there, that's consecrated to the Declaration of Independence. The Muhlenberg, which they were a political dynasty, his brother was down in Virginia. He was quite a pretty interesting individual as well. And then this is the Memorial Chapel, and we'll talk about that here in a second. I'm going to sit down just quick and then flip the camera around, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Thanks, everybody. Alright, so this is also, this original structure was known as well as the Old Salem Lutheran Church. This is actually, we visited Hill Church in Hill Lutheran Church, which is the oldest Lutheran church in Lebanon County. This is the oldest Lutheran church in Lebanon City. And Hill Lutheran, the first daughter church, as they call them, was this one. There's another one, I believe it's in Annville, is the second daughter church. I think it's St. James Lutheran Church. And the third one is Christ Lutheran Church in Belgrove, which is right near where I had lived in Steelstown, which I had tried to film there. had some issues, and I want to go back there because it has some neat, like, Civil War. It's not a real old cemetery because that church was built in 1850, so about 50, well, almost technically actually like 84 years later than this one, which was started in 1766, because I believe Hill Lutheran was started in like the late 1720s, early 1730s, but this was modified in 1848 because it's 2 stories now, because they had to add more room because congregation was growing, and that's why the memorial chapel was brought in here. And then there's a third building that's, each building is like 100 years later from the other one. They were getting like, I think, 1,000 to 1,500 parishioners coming in every single Sunday, so they built in that last building. I think this is called the I never heard of it called, I always called the Salem Memorial Chapel, but it's like Shock. It's SCHAUK or Schmock. It's one of those, Memorial Chapel. But this is very reminiscent. It's like it's a Gothic style, and they say it's Richardsonian, Romanesque influences, which I never heard of the Richardsonian, so I'm assuming it's the architect that created that style. Either his first name was Richard or his last name was Richard, but it's called Richardsonian and Romanesque, which is pretty common. It's somewhat similar to St. Luke's Episcopal Church. I doubt the Colemans had anything to do with this, but it may have been the same architect, just because they liked the way St. Luke's looked. Because St. Luke's was built, I believe, the Episcopal Church over there on, I'm trying to think, 6th Street. I believe that was built 1780s, and that's that church over in Cornwall. They have very much the same influence. It's the guy that designed Philadelphia City Hall, really renowned architect. And the Colemans like the Gothic type style. So you can see some similarities between this, which it may just be the style, architectural style, and St. Luke's. St. Luke's is a lot more grand, a lot larger. The stone from that was actually brought over from the robber, I believe, Habersham Coleman. His young wife passed away, and he had just built a mansion over in Cornwall, and he just basically was like, the heck with it, and he had it torn down. And excuse me. It was funny, concerned grandma just said, sent me a letter today I just got, and she said the cough seemed to be getting better, which it is, but it just every now and then something gets caught in there, so start phlegming up like a cat, my hairball or whatever it is. But he had the stone donated from his mansion for that St. Luke's Episcopal, and I believe that was 1880, so that would be a few years prior to this. The Memorial Chapel was built in 1898, and we'll go around that with limestone and sandstone. Sandstone would be the sort of reddish brownish stone. I'm not sure which stone, limestone or sandstone, is a little more porous, a little easier to work, but it's just the sandstone sort of operates as like an accent to the chapel. Yeah, and this is one of the first places, actually, too. Cool note, historical note. This is one of the first places that they read the Declaration of Independence, and we've talked about like Hanover Resolves. This is one of the places, the Hanover Resolves, which was the earliest document of its kind that was very much like the Declaration of Independence, which they say in some ways may have been an influence on the Declaration of Independence. The Lebanon Resolves were influenced by the Hanover Resolves, and the Lebanon Resolves were actually put together, I believe, here. And Muhlenberg would have had a great deal to do with that. Most likely the pastor, Ernst, who's been a pastor at the time of that going on. Yeah, so there's a lot of history here. It really is. This is definitely a hometown historic church, and we'll go more around this. It's just a cool little, almost like a park atmosphere here, which we'll go through and you'll see it here, but it's just beautiful. And it's a beautiful day today. I think it's like low 60s and light breeze. It's one of those days you're like, I really am happy I came out today. And let me just make sure I don't have anything else here. But I think part of me probably a log structure was the original church, but they sort of a lot of times, you know, cities like this, they would have that original church done in stone. So it's a good chance maybe this original chapel in 1766 would have been stone, but then that would have obviously been torn down to be replaced with this. But yeah, so I'll flip the camera around again. We're going to go around the Memorial Chapel. It's a beautiful building, stained glass. This was built in 1798 to accommodate the church's growth. And then the third building, which nothing architecturally significant, and only a building that's probably about 30 years old, but that was built then as well. Another 100 years later, in the late 1990s, to accommodate once again the church's growth, because they were getting 1,000 to 1,500 parishioners every Sunday. So let's flip this around and take a look at the Memorial Chapel. Alright, so here we're looking at the Memorial Chapel. Like I said, once again, Gothic, sort of Gothic revival, Romanesque, the Richardsonian design elements, architectural elements. And you just see where the original limestone church, and just how beautiful it is. Just gorgeous church. And like I said, it's sort of like this little park area, parking lot there, but then you just have this where it's just a gorgeous little spot in the city here. I think this is one of the prettiest churches, because I just love like the stone. It's just so crisp and clean, and with the white windows, and you know, they have almost I don't know if that's considered like colonial, because it would have been that time period, with just like how the windows are done, but just really, really neat. I will see if I can find maybe some interior pictures, but here once again you can see the beauty of this Memorial Chapel. And it's just all the different little details, from the little things there at the top of the towers, if you will, and then just the beautiful stained glass. You see the doors, how pretty those are. The lanterns. It's just neat to see all the history that comes with a place like this, especially when it has to do with like Revolutionary War. And there also is the same date, 2010, and there they have a thing where it say about it's 1898 Salem Memorial Chapel. And like I said, it does go by. It's like a shock Memorial Chapel, so I would assume they paid for part of it, or it was memorialized to a pastor or something. But there's a cool on top of those plinths, I guess, or the columns. They have the different faces, and I guess angelic faces. And it's just really pretty. And this is the third building that they built to accommodate as the church grew. But I just think that's such a beautiful stained glass there. It's just really beautiful structure. Put a lot of love and heart into it. And you see how the buildings actually connect there. So, yeah. So this is Salem Evangelical Lutheran Church, the Memorial Chapel, and this is the first of the hometown historic churches that we're going to be doing. This is the first video for that series. We will be going to Tabor Memorial, or Tabor Reformed Church. Now it's LCBC Church, because they just basically, I guess at some point, these different churches, they just run out of their parishioners, and they wind up selling the church off. So thankfully it has another use and it continues. But Tabor is the oldest church by a couple more years. But yeah, so we'll go on to our next adventure. Thanks for coming along, everybody, and we will see you all about town, and hopefully I can find some pictures for the insides of these, and I'll post those here at the end of the video. Thanks, everybody.